Jak Tichenor, WSIU-TV. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And as we are standing here, the legislature has one more day before they wrap up their business. Let's give viewers an overview. What are your assessments of what's happened in the legislature this spring?
Well, the main focus area is the budget this year. It's always a major focus, but in the last couple of years or so, we've been focused mainly on issues like pension reform for public employees and retirees. We had the same-sex marriage thing, concealed carry, all kinds of big, flashy kind of issues that are really complicated. They're very labor-intensive for the lawmakers. Medicaid reform, for example. All of these things have been going through this place in the course of the last 2 to 3 years, and a lot of these things have had gestation periods reaching back years before, and so all of these have made have kind of compressed time and space under the dome here for the last couple of years. This year, of course, a lot of that's been taken off the table. It's done, or it's in the courts in the case of pension reform. So now we're focused on the issue of whether or not to extend the temporary income tax rate at the 5% level, or letting it sunset at 3.75% in January. And it's been a kind of a colossal battle here between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans saying your spending has been the real problem here. You've got enough revenue to do this without extending this thing. Democrats, of course, painting things in the most drastic terms that they can of what would happen, the billions of dollars that would be lost for education, public safety, human services. So you've got this tension going back and forth. Complicating that, of course, is it's an election year. All 118 members of the House are up for re-election. A third of the Senate's up for re-election. And of course, there's this thing called a governor's race, and that's dominating everything. Pat Quinn, of course, has said he's come out. He said, we need to extend this thing. We need to do the best we can for our kids. Bruce Rauner we don't really know exactly where he's at on it, but it's expected that they're basically, the Republican line is that we can do this without more revenues if we do a better job of managing our budget.
And it's almost easy to forget some of the machinations as we went through this spring, that there was also an effort to have a progressive income tax, not just the extension, the change put in. The voters are going to see a number of constitutional amendments on the ballot. They're going to see a number of resolutions on the ballot, non-binding. One of them is to whether or not we should raise the minimum wage. Republicans said that's basically a gimmick to goose the Democratic turnout. So I guess, would you agree that this is, and you already kind of alluded to this, it's been a legislative session that has been so dominated, I think, by looking to November and then looking as to what's going to be happening with whomever the governor is going to be.
Right, and that's not unusual. I mean, it's been like that for the past 25 years that I've been covering this place, and the same for you. It's always an election year, but this year, I think it's drawn into a more narrow focus because of, the state's finances. In 2011, the Democrats basically did the income tax increase, hoping that it would be a temporary thing, or at least purported to be temporary. Well, now here we are. It's about to expire. The Republicans are asking, what did you do with the $26 billion that thing raised? Democrats say, well, we paid down a lot of back bills. We're now making our pension payments in full, on time, and the like. We're funding education as best we can. But at the end of the day, the House Democratic Caucus came up short on going along with the governor's proposal to permanently extend that income tax rate at 5%. And it's going to be you have a situation where they're passing as we speak what's some would call a maintenance budget or a flat budget, trying to keep spending at the same levels as the current fiscal year, which is 2014. They're using a lot of interfund borrowing. They're putting off paying some bills. They're doing a lot of different one-time gimmicks that may get them through about November or first part of next year. And then the wheels are, as the Democrats say, are going to start coming off of this thing. And you're going to be in a situation where if the next General Assembly and the next governor don't do something revenue-wise, whether it's extending the income tax or casino gambling or any number of different things, closing tax loopholes, the estimates are anywhere between $4 to $6 billion in new holes will show up in the budget come 2016, or fiscal year 2016.
Let me jump to a question. As we tape this, you had just done your show on and had Speaker Madigan, who doesn't do a lot of interviews, so congratulations on getting the Speaker. This will be airing after your show airs, so what are some of the things that the Speaker had to tell you?
Well, basically that it was going to be, he always knew all along it was going to be a tough vote for Democrats in his caucus. There are a number of Tier 1 lawmakers, probably a dozen or so, that would find it very difficult to vote for extending the income tax at a time when they're going up for, in some cases, their first re-election bid every 2 years. So it's no secret that that's been an issue. Some of them had actually signed a resolution as early as last year that they were not going to vote for this thing. So it's been kind of a question mark. The Speaker can be very persuasive, as you know, but at the end of the day, he's very cautious. He never gets too far out in front of his caucus and forcing them into things that could hurt them. So I'm not surprised that we're where we are at this point, not at all. You're from Southern Illinois, University of the Carbondale area. To what extent, what's your assessment of Southern Illinois politically right now relative to the governor's race, if you want to opine on that? I don't know if you've had a chance to focus on it too much. Do you have any sense of one way or the other, or are people not yet focused on that race? I'm not. I tend to be more focused on what's going on at the legislative level at this point. Clearly, the governor's got some ground to make up in Southern Illinois because over the past several years that he's been in office, he's made some decisions that were not necessarily very popular, closing the TAMS Supermax, trying to close the Murray Center in Centralia, some other things like that. Decisions that he said were tough. He needed to try to rein in state spending. That's kind of hard for him. But it's too early to say if Bruce Rauner's got that kind of turned around in his favor down in Southern Illinois. Rauner's going to be making some more appearances. I'm told that he's going to be in my part of the state next week, in fact, first week of June. So far, they only know him through the TV advertisements. They're starting to, he's made a few visits, he's starting to build up a network down there way too early in the thing. I don't think Southern Illinoisans are any different than most Illinoisans. They don't really start focusing on this thing to probably Labor Day or later. And then, of course, you've got the deluge of ads that start hitting the broadcast media.
Let me just go back as we close out. We mentioned the pension reform that passed last year. A judge has just now put a stay on the implementation of that. And so it's almost like a black hole, you might say, in space. We can feel the gravitational pull on putting together this budget. They don't know, the lawmakers, if they're going to have that savings, if they're going to have to start all over on pension reform. Mm-hmm. And you yourself, working through the university environment, kind of have more of a feel for the impact. It's caused a lot of consternation among those people who are working for the state as far as do they stay with the state, do they not? What is your assessment of where we are? What impact is that hanging fruit, so to speak, out there? This bill that's passed, it's in law, but we don't know if it's really going to be implemented ever.
Well, the big thing, of course, that's going to be the most obvious impact it's going to have is the impact on the budget. The savings are somewhere in the order of $1 billion to $1.5 billion a year, if I remember that correctly, that the state will realize through lower annual income adjustments for retirees, by postponing retirement for some employees, by doing a number of different things that will actually ratchet down the amount of cash that goes out into the systems. They did another thing in which your annual annuity adjustment is based on the first $30,000 of your annuity. So, in other words, the percentage increase wouldn't go toward somebody who was making $60,000-$70,000 in their annuity. So, there's a number of steps there that, if this is found unconstitutional, the lawmakers are going to have to go back and reopen this whole thing again. And we were talking about long gestational periods for these things. This thing has been back there for at least the last 10 years. The crash of 2008 just really put it up front. It was totally it's been unsustainable for years, but at that point, with all the impact on other revenues, they had to do something. So we're now what, probably several months to a year before we know what the outcome's going to be on that. So that's lurking back there. We just talked about all the other pressures, whether or not this income tax increase stays on the books at that rate. You've got that specter hanging over it. Maybe it is a black hole, sucking the life out of the place. So those are all things that they're kind of on everyone's mind. This year, those savings were not factored into the budget. They're making the budget payments, or they're making the full pension payments. The actual impact on employees has been pretty profound, and for the sake of transparency, I'm a state employee. I work through the university, and I had actually filed my retirement papers based on some of the information we were getting about it before the court issued a stay, and I basically was able to go back and kind of unwind the thing. But a lot of people were being told, there was a lot of confusion about what exactly would happen after June 1st and July 1st, when portions and all of this law took effect. People were under the impression that they could be losing a large share of their annuity. They were told that if they had overpaid, in the case of employees who had maxed out their pensions by working over 30 years or whatever, that they'd lose those overpayments, that they might, if they went later, have to skip when they would get their adjustments. So a lot of people were lined up and ready to go. A lot of them did go, probably several hundred statewide, and in just SERS, the state university's retirement system. But you also had people in other branches of state government thinking about doing the same thing. Some are coming back. Some have basically put the kibosh on their retirement plans and are kind of breathing a sigh of relief. And so all of this, it's been an interesting year in a lot of respects.
Let me close out. I was going to wrap it up there, but I just was reminded that there's another huge issue out there that we almost forgot, and it's term limits. The effort to try to that which may or may not have an impact on the gubernatorial race. It's being backed by Bruce Rauner. Now Governor Quinn has kind of said, I'm also in favor of it at one function. Mm-hmm. Having covered state government for a number of years, do you have any feelings? There's this argument that it would hurt the professionalism if you forced people with experience out. Do you have any assessment one way or the other on that issue?
It was kind of interesting. On the way up yesterday to the Capitol, I was listening to the St. Louis public radio station, and they were talking with a senator who was being term limited out. She had served 8 years.
We should say in Missouri they have term limits.
Right. She'd been a senator for 8 years. She's from Kansas City. And it sounded like she had just hit her stride within the last 2 to 3 years in terms of her ability to get things done, to make things happen legislatively, understanding where she was with everything. That's going to be a part of it. There's a lot of institutional knowledge here. When you take a lawmaker, for example, who has worked on a specialty area like Medicaid reform, I know a number of these folks who have worked on this day in and day out in the run-up to the Medicaid Reform Act a couple of years ago. They worked 7 days a week on it for months. If not, in some cases, they've worked on it for years. These folks know this thing inside and out. They're not going to they depend on staff to help them with some things, but they also have become very well educated on that. So you're going to lose that. How will it affect the legislative power base in these various offices with the legislative leaders? Well, that's, of course, what Rauner's getting at. And there's a lot of popular sentiment about that. But at the end of the day, there is a worry among some folks who've watched state government that, well, if you do that, then you're going to lose this talent, you're going to have some brain drain, but you're also going to have legislators being more and more dependent on their staffs and the lobbyists.
And hopefully the staff would be familiar, huh?
Yeah.
Well, we were just talking in assert. I mean, we were just talking about this pension bill.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's thrown out, as many people think it may be, and you have to start all over, then that is an extremely complicated area. And you have people like Elaine Neckritz that were one of the big people. So the argument, I think, would be if you lost those people,
right,
and you had to start over, then you're going to be starting over trying to take on an extremely complicated issue without those people who had already kind of topped out that knowledge pool.
Exactly. So what you ended up doing was each caucus here, the Democrats in the House and Senate, Republicans in the same places, they all have people who, for one reason or another, are experts on a particular issue. Some are revenue experts, that you can sit down and talk to a Matt Murphy on the Senate Republican side or a Dan Kotowski on the Democrat side and really get into the nuts and bolts of how the budget works or where it goes off the rails. You wouldn't necessarily have them in the future. And I wonder about that. And I've covered a lot of these folks. This is the 23rd year, I think, I've worked on the Illinois Lawmakers show. And I know politicians get a really bad rap. Most of the people here care about what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They may not always be able to accomplish, their goals for whatever reason. But I think they care deeply about the reason that they're here and that they can affect change. And I think that going back to a thing I remember Paul Simon for, 95% of what goes on here isn't partisan. It's just the nuts and bolts of keeping things going. And when you're confronted with a problem, going over and getting the thing fixed.
Yeah, it's a good place maybe to wrap up, and it is. I think I would echo your sentiments. It's unfortunate when we get a few bad apples, which you have in any organization that gets so much press, and then we have the populace saying they're all a bunch of crooks, that it's not true. There's really very good people working in state government and in the legislature.
Yeah, there certainly are. There are people. If I want to become educated on an issue, I pick up the phone, I talk to them, and the facts really aren't Republican or Democrat. They are what they are, and these people are very well informed on it. I understand the throw the bums all out kind of mentality. I get that. There are some bums that probably need it. We won't go into detail or name names, but at the end of the day, you got a lot of hardworking people here in the place, and I think it kind of comes down to, I'll keep voting for my guy or my gal because they do a good job for me, but the rest of them, get rid of them, Well, think about how that plays out in a state with 13 million people, as geographically and demographically diverse as Illinois is.
All right. Well, Jak Tichenor, thank you for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. Always a pleasure.